Good morning and thank you for joining us. I'm your friendly neighborhood moderator, Tiffany, and we're just going to give it a minute for folks to get into the room and then we'll get started. Okay, it looks like everyone from the lobby has made it into the room. If you have any issues with audio or visual, my recommendation is to leave and come back. And I will say that in the chat really quickly as well. And then we'll go ahead and get started. My name's Tiffany. I'm your moderator today. I'll be back with you for Q&A after I do these few short intro slides, and then I'm going to hand it off to our speakers. Today's presentation is called Beyond Translation, Transadaptation as a Tool for Equity and Engagement. Thank you again for joining us. The agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to do some introductions, talk about who we are, what transadaptation is, why it matters, a few real-world examples that really illustrate what's happening when we talk about transadaptation versus translation, our 6-step approach to the process, a short decision matrix, a little note on governance and QA, and then a little bit more about how we help and what comes next. At the end of the presentation, you will receive a recording and a link to our transadaptation guide, which has some valuable information inside. It's a PDF. You can, look at it on your screen or print it off, whatever makes sense for you. Now I'm going to hand it off to our presenters, and we'll start with Andrés, who will introduce himself, and then go ahead, Cary, and then Dan. Go ahead, fellas, all you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Andrés Pi Andreu. I'm a bilingual curriculum developer, writer, and cultural consultant. I'm thrilled to be here in partnership with SRM to talk about a powerful concept that is transadaptation, and that is transforming how we reach multilingual learners, transadaptation.
Fantastic. Thanks, Andres. I'm Cary Drake. I'm VP of Client Partnerships here at Six Red Marbles. I've been in education, publishing, and learning experience design for about 25 years. I've been with Six Red for about 11 years. Excited for this conversation and to share some information that we have for you today.
Thanks, Cary. I'm Dan Souers, AVP Client Partnerships. Like Cary, I've been in the industry for 20 plus years. Several stops along the way, both on the publisher provider side and then also on the vendor side. I've been with Six Red Marbles for roughly 2 stints, actually, but all in all, probably around 11 years as well. So happy to, I'm thankful that you're all here today, and we look forward to sharing what we know about this. So I think the next slide's you, Cary.
Yep. So for those of you who may be not very familiar with Six Red Marbles, we want to take just a minute to share a little bit about who we are and what we do. So SRM is a full-service curriculum and content development company. We've been designing and developing learning experiences in both English and Spanish for over 30 years. We serve the K-12, CTE, higher ed, adult learning markets. Our organization is made up of just over 350 full-time education experts and specialists. And over those 3 decades, we've refined our development approach and workflows and tools that allow us to quickly scale very large projects on tight deadlines without compromising on the quality of the deliverables. So tons of experience, a robust team, and high quality at scale.
Yeah, and we stay current with industry trends and practices, and our team's always looking for ways to improve and incorporate those, new ways of doing things into our our day-to-day working environment. We have a team of experts, both with classroom and industry experience, and we also have a team of instructional designers who really, do put learners first in everything that we do and develop. And then we have a production team as well that has decades of experience in having produced or collaborated on many of the products that you see in today's classrooms. So custom development is really what we do. everything that we work on is fully owned by our clients, and we tailor all of our projects specific to our clients' needs. And the way that we, the way that we engage with our clients is that we really do try to set up our teams as an extension of their team. So that client-centric approach is that, we want to make a seamless transition between how we work client to client, and making sure that our teams really are, part of theirs as well. And we're always looking for ways to innovate and improve on our processes. So, we never really stop learning. That's kind of our motto. But, from what that means is that, we're always looking for ways to improve and make things better and incorporate new technologies and approaches into our daily work. This is just a quick snapshot of some of the companies and organizations out there that we've worked with. There's probably more than this on there, but this is just to give you an idea of who we collaborate with.
And just say again that we're going to share this deck with everybody as well, so you can take a look at some of these things in more detail after the fact as well.
So, and then we come to the most important part of the presentation is what is transadaptation. So let's begin with the common concept, which is the translation. The translation is direct linguistic conversion of text from one language to the other. But transadaptation is a pedagogical process of rewriting and adapting content to meet cultural, linguistic, and contextual needs of the learner. So one transfers language and the other one transfers meaning. We have like a example here of what transadaptation and this linguistic conversion means, and we can see it in this example. No, so in the Spanish language proverbs, which is the equivalent English language proverb. So cría cuervos y te sacarán los ojos, raise ravens and they'll pick out your eyes, which is something, maybe you can guess what it means, but it really means don't bite the hand that feeds you. So when we translate it or transadaptate it in the correct way, we transfer the meaning, just not the words. So let's start with a simple, powerful distinction that we already did. The translation is what most people think when they talk about access. It's the conversion of text, as we said, from one language to the other. Yeah, you are taking English words and replacing them with the Spanish equivalent. It's fast, it's functional, but often it's not enough. So transadaptation, on the other hand, is something deeper. Think of, for example, of this, like translation, what do the words say? And transadaptation asks, what do this word means to this learner? So let me give you an example. If I take a decodable English reader that says, pat the bad sad on a mat, which is very typical for this decodables, and I translate it to pat el murciélago se sentó en una alfombra. I'm technically done my job as a translator, but have I supported learning? Probably not. I mean, the phonics sequence, cultural framing, and cognitive load are all off. The student now has to decode in familiar vocabulary while managing a dissonant structure. Now let's transadapt that. We choose the name like Paco and a familiar animal like gato, and words aligned to the syllabic and phonetic development in Spanish. Now we have Paco, el gato salta en el saco. That's not just accurate, it's empowering. And that's the difference. And this doesn't just apply to early literacy. When we translate or when we transadapt social studies content or SLA narrative, we are asking ourselves, what does fairness, respect, or courage means in this children's culture or in its cultural lens? Are we using metaphors and voices they can actually connect to? So transadaptation is not a luxury, it's a necessity if we want equity, not just inclusion. So districts and platforms are under pressure to move beyond access into equity. That means content needs to connect not just linguistically, but also culturally. That's where transadaptation can become a competitive edge. And why transadaptation matters now. So equity isn't just about access, it's about meaningful connection. Yeah, because multicultural learners are not just navigating language, they're navigating identity, representation, and belonging. And in today's classrooms, particularly in states with high ELL population like Texas, California, and Florida, we see students who speak Spanish at home, think bilingually, and process information through lived cultural frameworks. No, when we offer them word-for-word translation, we're often giving them material that may be technically correct, but educationally and emotionally is disconnected. So you can see it here in that this data and this, I mean, 1 in 4 US students speaks a non-English language at home. So ELL, emerging bilingual population, are as the fastest growing in K-12. Bilingualism is an asset, instruction is reflected. So this graphic like describes exactly what is happening in our country, and that in telling us that without transadaptation, learners get access, but not comprehension and belonging.
Okay, this brings us to our first poll. You can either use the QR code or go to slido.com and put in this code to input your answers. And
Easy
I
to
will
do.
put that link in the chat.
Yep. So just grab your phones, scan that QR code, take you right to Slido, or you can grab the link in the chat from Tiffany, throw it into a browser window. And you can see the question is for multilingual learners, which content areas are you prioritizing? So not a surprise. I see some of the first answers are literacy. Okay, and again, the answers to the poll will also be in the deck when you receive that as well, so you can see the final results. But clearly, literacy topping that, math as well, SEL coming up too. All right, moving on.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Yeah. So we have some real world examples of what happens when we translate instead of Transadapt. Let's look at them. We have like 3 examples, but I in some cases which you could see that it's very straightforward what is happening. I would also give like examples by the different classes like civics and literacy, because I see you guys are interested in how we translate in literacy. But in this case, it's like a very typical failure in not applying cross-linguistic transfer, which is the false cognitive disaster. This happens a lot in the classroom when we literally translate a phrase like the teacher is very embarrassed, and we say la maestra está muy embarazada, no? You're saying like the teacher is very pregnant, because you're like literally use a false cognate with it, which is it's going to create a lot of confusion, and because now they're gonna ask like, well, where was the teacher's belly, and why nobody's told us before, or imagine that the teacher is male, so it will be like 15 minutes of giggles and confusion there. So the correct Spanish here, you translate that and use the proper translation is la maestra está muy avergonzada. So she feels very embarrassed for some reason. So the teaching point here, so false cognates change tone and meaning, not just individual words. And now I'm gonna use this moment to talk, for example, how transadaptation applies in literacy. For example, in a recent grade 2 literacy unit, I was working, the original English story was about a child like building a snowman. And her grandparents were like in the countryside and helping her. And the translated Spanish version kept the setting, the same character names and activities, but it didn't resonate. And why? Because many of the bilingual students were from Central America. They've never seen snow, and certainly didn't call their grandparents, you know, abuelo and abuela, the ones in the story. In the same way, the story presented as grandma and grandpa. So what did we do? We transadapted the story. So the snowman became a sandcastle. The snowman became a sandcastle. So the grandparents were named Dida and Luis, I think, based on community use. And the setting changed to a familiar beach. So the reading goal, sequence steps in a process, was preserved. But now the students were excited. They make connections. They told their own stories because they know the beach. They have touched those elements, since they were born, and can use previous knowledge to make connections. And if you use cultural competence to teach language, we do it better by not introducing elements or settings that challenge the students, with things they don't know or understand, like cultural nuances or traditions that would deviate their focus, from what we want them to learn. So the next example is also representative in another way of how we avoid confusion with a good transadaptation. So in original English, and this is tomorrow is a show and tell, bring something special from home to share with the class. And this has different levels of confusion. So mañana es mostrar y contar, traigan algo especial de la casa para compartir con la clase. So that made some students, confused. They are English learners. And mostrar y contar, this is a new game, eso es un nuevo juego. Tengo que regalarlo o dárselo a otros, because compartir in Spanish also means like share it but to give, as a gift. So that literal translation of activity name can obscure the purpose, and translation restores clarity. Transadaptation restores the clarity that translation, provokes, and classroom becomes more functional. So, and I have the next example we have is for social and emotional learning, I think, and in an SLA unit, I remember. This one is one of the examples, but I want to give another one too, because I remember it now. I was like working on an SLA unit on respect and responsibility, and the English language anchor story featured a classroom, but a moose named Gunter, and it was cute, it was a very nice moose. But in the Dominican American classroom, no one connected with it. It was a prevalent Dominican community, and we transadapted the text. So the moose became a parrot, which is culturally relevant, and responsibility was taught through how students took turns, like feeding, taking care of, or caring about the parrot. And a small change, it was a small change, but the results were like, more engaging with the students. And in this case is something that we need to try to avoid in confusion, because it's related to social and emotional learning. So it's the next slide.
Next slide, Tiff.
Yeah. So in this case, when the translation touches a point that with words that carry weight, that mean things that can emotionally challenge the students. In this case, use a timeout chair to help students reset when they feel overwhelmed. So if you translate that directly, usa la silla de castigo para ayudar a los estudiantes a tranquilizarse cuando se sientan abrumados. Silla de castigo, it's like a punishment chair. It's a direct translation. So that evokes shame, punishment, and humiliation. And the FLA intent, which is reset and regulation, becomes punitive and becomes aggressive to the student. So you need to also be aware that that certain words carry weight. So use la silla para calmarse instead of for punishing. So the calming chair, but so the student could do and that function matches SLA intent and safe regulation, not punishment. And I wanted to introduce also an example for civics that is not here. We only have 3 examples because I see you guys also were interested in how we use transadaptation to teach civics. I mean, in civics, representation is everything. So the original example in a voting lesson, for example, I wrote a while back, show a suburban town council meeting, all white faces, English only saying needs, Our transadapted version included bilingual community centers, diverse residents, a cultural celebration as part of the civic discourse. So now students saw themselves in the process. That's not just equity. That's preparation for real civic participation. So in each case, the learning that we target didn't change. I mean, but the connections did. Students went from passive readers to active thinkers, from viewers to participants. And that's the promise of transadaptation, not to replace the content, but to activate it.
Good.
So, and here we have our 6-step transadaptation process. So first is the content discovery. We start by understanding the learning goals, the target audience, and the intended experience. So is it a phonic reader, an SLL video, a civics simulation? Who's going to use it and how? No, that's for example. So how come all together it's like starting by content discovery. Then we go to step 2, which is cultural and pedagogical analysis. Next, in this step, we ask, what assumptions are embedded in the original content? Do the visuals, idioms, values, or references translate across cultures? Or do they alienate? So we align the content with cross-linguistic transfer and cultural competence frameworks. Then comes the drafting and adaptation. Here's where the creative works begin. Here's where content developers and curriculum developers begin to put their hands inside. And now our bilingual teams craft a version that maintains the original learning objectives while infusing it with cultural relevance and age-appropriate language. So we don't just replace words, we reshape meaning to fit learners' real lives. Then comes the community and expert review. This is a very, very important part. No one knows the community better than those who serve it. That's why we bring in teachers, cultural experts, and bilingual reviewers, especially when the audience includes heritage speakers. No? We ask, does this sound like us? Or does this sound like them? Will students see themselves in this? And a very funny example that comes to mind, it's when many teachers use cultural references and TV or show references to make the everything nicer. And here it's Kermit the Frog was like a character that many teachers use. Oh, Kermit the Frog, and then they will say la rana Kermit fue hoy al mercado. But there is one tiny detail. In Spanish, Kermit's name is not Kermit. It's René, So La Rana René. So you would tell kids Kermit, La Rana Kermit, and no one will catch that. And that's the reason that we need to know how they, experience life. So then comes the finalization and production. So once approved, all the material, we move into high quality audio, interactive or print production, ensuring accessibility, consistency, and technical precision. From the colorable books to game field apps, Transadaptation travels across media. So we do the same for every type of media we use to teach. And this isn't a one size fits all process. I mean, it's customizable. Depending on the product that we are developing, the publisher, the audience, and the purpose, which is the purpose is very important. That's what makes adaptation so powerful, I think, and so necessary in today's educational landscape. And well, the last one is the classroom feedback. So when to use it. I mean, and yeah, and classroom feedback, it's very important because at the end, it's what gives us the temperature of the room or what we develop. And that sends us to when to use transadaptation and when to use translation, because in many occasions we can do translations and others we can pick a mix of both, and other times we need transadaptation.
All right, thanks, Andres. So I guess this question is really to the field and to get a sense of how you guys are using transadaptation and localizing your content. So this is just another survey, and you can just use the QR code once again to get some responses up there. We'd love to know. Yeah, no translation. That's all. Interesting. We really feel that most of what we do really is in the transadaptation realm, I would say. The full Spanish language arts development. Interesting. So it looks like that's kind of where we are, with either nobody not having done any translation yet, or when we approach something, more often than not, it is transadaptation for all the reasons that Andres just went into with educational content.
Yeah. So we come to a decision matrix. So, this decision matrix help us see when straight translation works and when we truly need transadaptation. I mean, for technical documents and platform menus and things like that, precision and fixed structures are key. So a direct translation is not only sufficient, but ideal. But when we shift to student-facing curriculum, SLA lessons or video scripts, the rules clearly change. Yeah, so these materials must do more than convey information. They must be felt, understood, and culturally interpreted by students. So a literal translation in this context can alter meaning, flatten the tone, or even create cultural misunderstanding. So transadaptation, on the other hand, preserves instructional intent, also emotional nuance or learner engagement. So ensuring the content lands with clarity and authenticity. And that's the reason this decision matrix could help you if you need to decide for budgetary meanings, for example, how to do a complex translation that across many different products. So, and that brings it to our final part, which is the governance. So when we talk about governance and QA, we're really talking about keeping the vision consistent, transparent, and centered on learner impact. So the most important part here is how learner impact would be changed or would be accomplished. So we start with clear notes. So a content owner, a transadapter, a bilingual SMA, a community reviewers, and a QA lead. So each brings a different lens. So accuracy one, cultural alignment the other, and instructional intent should remain intact. So they have a frame in which they work. Each expert has the same intent that this instructional intent stays intact. Then we move through our quality gates, so especially EE checklists, so equity, engagement, and empowerment, along with any pilot feedback. And these checkpoints help us validate not just correctness, but whether the experience actually works for multilingual learners. You would be surprised how many times you need to change like a very simple paragraph because the experience actually is not working for multilingual learners. In some communities, you have like not only one multilingual group. And for example, here in Florida, in Miami, we have Creole and Spanish. So we have two different communities that need to be addressed. And finally, the output. So every deliverable must be production ready. So all text, captions, accessibility checks, and voiceover notes that match the dialect and platform needs. So these details ensure consistency and usability and a polished experience for teachers and students, which is what we always aim for.
Thanks, Andres. So we support development of Spanish programs in a number of different ways, and we wanted to give you just a couple of examples here. For a large educational publisher, we recently developed a bilingual K-5 literacy program end-to-end, meaning we started with standards alignment, scope, and sequence through the final digital deliverables in both English and Spanish concurrently. We also, a nonprofit curriculum provider, we recently did our Transadaptation approach, started from the learning objectives, as Andres had mentioned as well, reshaping that content so that the Spanish version was natural, was age appropriate, pedagogically equivalent to the English product as well. We also help them with the digital user experience, translating in this case, not transadapting the navigation in the LMS, the user interface labels, help menus, and error messages. And for the audio, we utilize voice talent that had extensive experience in educational Spanish, so that pronunciation and pacing and tone really hit the mark. Also, just Andres mentioned it, but QA for Transadaptation goes beyond simple proofreading. We check the language level and the cognitive demand and how well the Spanish version preserved the instructional design and learning experience of the original one. And lastly, I just wanted to say that, to sort of de-risk the investment for clients, we often start with just one fully transadapted pilot unit and then gather teacher feedback for revisions before scaling up to adapt the entire program. So, we consistently receive feedback from teachers that the transadapted programs result in higher levels of engagement, improvement, student comprehension when it's compared to just a basic translation.
All right, yeah, and then now we're going to do one more survey, and I think really what we'd like to know from you guys is, what headwinds have you guys experienced that have held you guys back from being able to do some transadaptation, or move a program into a transadapted version.
And as you answer that, we did get a great question in the chat that I wanted to go ahead and share with the group so that you can speak to this. I know we're not quite to the Q&A yet, but it just came in. For a curriculum company, how is this scalable? Considering there are many cultural differences between Spanish-speaking students, how is it possible to transadapt one English curricula for those many cultural situations?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question, right? So I think we would spend time with you understanding the different, end users and where we might need to modify, doing the transadaptation so that it crosses or bridges the gaps between the different cultures that may be your end users. So I think that, you need to spend some time together talking about those sort of nuanced elements to it so that we could do that for a singular product.
Yeah, I would also add that, like, we're gonna, in understanding the product that you're gonna have, is it gonna be a Texas version? Is it a Florida version? Is it a South American version? Is it a California version? Each one of those localities have localized versions of Spanish. So that's all taken into consideration as to, what the end product's gonna be. Obviously, you may have some students that have a Cuban background or a Puerto Rican background versus a Mexican Spanish background. You kind of have to take it into consideration with the locality of where the product's going to be consumed more often than not. But I guess that's what we would say is how it's scalable. We do use a neutral version of Spanish that I guess is pretty well accepted across the United States. But there are some that we're looking at doing, for product that might be consumed in, like, say, Colombia or something. Obviously the localization of that version of Spanish would be taken into consideration. Andres, do you want to add anything to that?
To that question, yeah, I have a lot to say about it. I think it's an excellent question, and it gets to the heart of what high quality Spanish development really is. So we don't transadapt for 20 cultures. I mean, we transadapt for the instructional purpose. So Spanish transadaptation isn't about creating a version for Mexico, another for Puerto Rico, or for Argentina. That would not be scalable. I mean, instead of what we do is we transadapt to meet language development goals, SLA, ELD, SLS, the pedagogical structure of Spanish, the cultural clarity needed for comprehension, and the identity affirming elements relevant to the diaspora, no? To all this community that makes the Hispanic world. This makes the process scalable because the adaptation is anchored to linguistic principles, not regionalism. So the Spanish-speaking students share cultural and linguistic foundations. They share the same. Some of them are the same, despite regional validations. Variations. No. So Spanish has always shared syntax. It had a shared morphology, shared orthography, shared foundational skills progressions. We have shared academic registers and discourses structures. So these uniform features allow a single transadapted version to serve the entire Spanish-speaking diaspora, I think, effectively. This is what makes scalability possible. So at the end, we aim for cultural neutral clarity, not hyperlocalization. And when you avoid content that it only makes sense in one country, instead we use, examples, scenarios, and reference that are universally meaningful to Spanish-speaking students in the U.S. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's very much like, a publisher creating a national edition in English, right?
Right.
You don't utilize very localized references and details about Texas or South Carolina or because you're reaching a national audience, and that's the goal of that product. But then they customize certainly for Texas, Florida, California, what have you. So it's similar to that in that fashion.
Yeah, we do not rely on regional slangs or country-specific metaphors, for example. And also it's very important to avoid culturally confusing references from the English original, for example. The content works for everybody, like Mexican American, Puerto Ricans, and this with one version of the curriculum. I could extend myself like in 3 or 4 points or 6 more points, but I think if you have more questions about it, we could talk afterward.
Okay, and it's real quick. These are just some sample pilot options that we have, as an initial engagement with you if interested. Were there other questions that we'd like to get to, Tiffany?
Yes, we do have a couple other questions. The first one is, how do we get kids to engage and participate and get info in without sounding like a boring college professor? I like this one.
For the Spanish, I think it's similar to the way that you level up in an English product as well, right? There are certain things that are engaging for a K2 product that would not really be important for a middle school program as well. So there's some of that that's consideration when you're developing the product. And Andres, you were about to say something. Sorry, go ahead.
No. It's at the end, that's a question that all teachers in all languages ask themselves.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
to keep children engaged and to make them participate is the main problem for teachers in the modern, I mean, in all classrooms of any time, you know. But I think if we use also, a strategy. So if we have use like the sequence that is safety, structure, language supports, and motivation. If we have that in mind, and then we create a framework around that idea and that process, we will build a psychological safety first environment in which they feel comfortable. And once they feel comfortable, then they will engage. The use of humor, it's very important, I think, and it's very undervalued in the educational market and in educational instruction, for example.
What else, Tiffany?
So we do have another interesting question. I'm interested in learning how transadaptation can help avoid a specific kind of tokenism, e.g., we added non-European American names to the text, so now it's culturally diverse when creating student-facing materials. And I want to say to this one, my K-12 experience in the 90s very much had a lot of this kind of representation where it would have like Mary and Juan, or, so it would just add names intentionally to make it feel inclusive, but it just wasn't.
I need to see that question in writing because it's too long.
Okay, Andres, I'll put it in the chat, but basically it's how do we avoid just putting non-European names in stuff to, reduce this idea of tokenism.
Oh, yeah, but that comes in the essence of the transadaptation. And in many occasions, it's like when we, for example, are transitioning from ELA program to the SLA program. And that's the reason we, in certain percentage of the anchor readings or readings, we use heritage, authentic literature and authentic passages that that are used to then develop the instruction. So cultural competence plays a huge role there, in which you select an environment and the means to teach language and to teach, what you're supposed to teach. You teach content and also language at the same time by using authentic scenarios and literature. So that's the way, if you have a multicultural classroom, that's the way we would handle that. Like, and we also can tailor instructions for certain clients that need to cover that. So that's speaks of our adaptation in curriculum development.
Andres was one I think it would be good to get your input on. It's about what do you advise when transadapting English writing assessments into Spanish, given the differences in structure of the two languages?
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, what do transadapting English writing assessment into Spanish? I mean, transadapting writing assessment is not a word-for-word process, no? It requires rebuilding tasks.
Right.
No? So they validly measure Spanish writing, not English writing, translated into Spanish. So we need to rebuild the rubric for Spanish, not translated. So English rubrics evaluate always thesis statements, paragraph structure, English syntax, and English specific punctuation. So Spanish writing has different norms. So topic sentence is different from English thesis style. Paragraph transitions differ. So sin embargo, por lo tanto, things like that. Verb mood richness is different. So the subjunctive in Spanish, for example. The agreement in genre and género y número. The diacritics and accent rules, and also Spanish sentences, rhythm and length. So you must redesign the rubric so it evaluates Spanish rhetorical and grammatical conventions. The other thing I would say is that we need to reframe the prompt using Spanish discourse logic. So in English, for example, writing prompts really rely heavily on, like, I would say, linear argument structure. I would say they rely in explicit tense declaration and topic claim evidence order. But in Spanish, rhetorical traditions allow inductive sequencing, for example, or relational language, or maybe elaboration before assertion. That's the difference. So the Spanish prompt needs to be equally rigorous, but linguistically authentic and aligned to Spanish discourse patterns, which are different from the English. So it's the same task purpose, but different linguistic scaffolding. And then we have another point that is very important is that to adjust sentence frames and support. So in English, scaffolds often rely on transitions like first, next, and in conclusion, clauses built around English word order and things like that. But in Spanish, scaffolds should instead model like principalmente, por ejemplo, sin embargo, no? And topic sentence built around Spanish syntax. So complex verb phrases, like we all know in Spanish, we have, and also related clauses. So support must teach Spanish writing, not English in Spanish, which is one of the first things we say. And lastly, to ensure that task measures the same construct without mirroring in English. And this is something that bad transadapting, it comes very to mind when I think about this. A common mistake, for example, is translating the prompt procedures. Translating the prompt procedures, a task that measures English rhetorical logic instead of Spanish writing proficiency. So instead, we need to keep the cognitive demand and keep the writing general. So that type of things, that it's the things that comes to mind when writing assessment.
And I think the questions are really get to the heart of the difference between just a straight translation and transadaptation, right? All those things that you walk through, Andres, I mean, that really is the core of the difference. And some of the issues like tokenisms, I mean, that's what you find in a really poorly translated product that is just attempting to check the box.
And we
There's a
are over
question.
time, but we
Okay.
do have one more question. And I think this question is very relevant. We'll close with this. And if anybody has any other questions, you're welcome to follow up. You can reply to the email you'll receive in a little while after the event, or to the email you see on your screen now, or go to our Transadaptation site and fill out the form. So we have a question. Spanish was referenced a lot in this presentation, likely because it's the most prevalent second language in the US. What other languages are commonly requested for transadaptations, and what is the ability to transadapt those?
What is our ability? Yeah.
Well, my experience is the second most requested is Creole, because of the big Asian community. I mean, the big Asian community here in the States, and different states like Florida and Mississippi.
Yeah.
And then it goes to German, the third, and Chinese lately, like a lot. And of course, there are companies that can achieve that. The Chinese, they are like companies that have been like doing it for years. We have the capability of doing in multiple language too, but this presentation is about transadaptation for Spanish. But sure, we have capacity to do it in Creole too. I've done like a couple of programs too.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming today. Again, you'll get an email. It'll have the recording. It will have access to our transadaptation guide. You'll then receive another follow-up email with the deck. We just have to finalize those poll results, so you'll be able to see them. Otherwise, please stay in touch. We will be having more webinars around various topics in the K-12 publishing editorial space over the coming months, and we hope to see you again. And if you do have anything else, please feel free to reach out. We really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Gracias.
Thank you. Gracias. Ciao.